Hey guys, welcome to Pokemon Talk with CALLOUS. We've got a foursome of all men, everybody's favorite. It is myself, Jabba, Dizno, and We've got ourselves a pretty controversial topic that I think should be entertaining. We're actually going to hit on multiple topics. This kind of brings a bunch of subtopics, actually, but basically, how important is in-game analysis versus prior to the game analysis? Is team preview a good thing or a bad thing? How does it change analysis? Do people go too far with prepping for a certain person, trying to counter team them? Do people in game get too influenced by who they're playing against versus what they're playing against? All that kind of stuff. Loaded topic. I'm not even sure where to begin, so I guess we're going to start it here. Do people go too far in trying to prepare for a specific opponent? Jabba.
Almost certainly. I think, and I've fallen into the trap too. Back when I played SPL, I did a lot of some seasons every once in a while. My best season, actually, funnily enough, I never prepared specifically for an opponent, and I think that contributed to doing so well because I think people often fall into the trap of thinking, well, my opponent has brought, Skarnbliss 65% of his games, so he's probably going to bring it now, so I'll over-prepare for that a little bit. And then once they don't do it, you are instantly at a disadvantage because now you added a little extra something to cover what they just didn't bring. So I think maybe have it in the back of your mind, but don't overcommit like I think a lot of people are prone to do.
So we'll throw it over to Dizno. I think all four of us can agree, we don't need to go too far, that considering what your opponent plays more than zero obviously matters. The question is not should you consider what your opponent is doing, it's do people go too far with it? What do you think, Dizno?
Yeah, I do. In regards to people go too far, I don't know if I can speak for other people. It's hard to know what other people are thinking. I don't really see people telling other people, what their decision to bring the team was all that much. But just to touch back on what Jabba said, yeah, I think I agree. Like, the more you kind of prepare for your opponent specifically in that match, to me it seems like a defeatist decision. Like, oh, my opponent's good, they're going to bring this, I should bring this to counter them. Like, if you're the person who you believe is the better player, why wouldn't you be bringing your team and presuming that they'll try and counter you? Or, if you get me along that wavelength. But also, I just don't think that it's a good tactic overall statistically, or just in terms of kind of how likely it is that they will bring the team you're looking for too. Obviously, if your opponent has a weakness to a certain threat, you could maybe stick that threat on a solid team of yours. But I wouldn't go too crazy with it, and I definitely don't think that it's a solid tactic overall when preparing for an opponent. Although, what do I know? I'm a ladder player.
Well, actually, I want to touch on something that you just said that I think is a very valid sub-argument here. So yes, if you think you're the better player, I agree. Why wouldn't you just make them try to counter you? Why wouldn't you just bring a solid team and not try to adapt to someone that you think is worse than you are? But what if you're the worst player? What if you are, you don't have an ego, that you think someone is better than you and you feel that maybe you need to catch a break or maybe you need to catch a matchup in order to beat that person? I'll throw it over to Zokuru. Is there any merit to going, you know what? I probably have to cheese this guy out. Or you know what? I think this guy's better than me. Maybe I run a high risk, high reward kind of team, and that's my best chance to beat this guy. Do you support that mindset at all?
Um, I think I think that this mindset is a good thing. A good thing when you are a competitive player because your goal is to win the. Sorry, that was a car, but your goal will be to win the maximum amount of game you can. And so if you just if you're paired with like big AC and you think there is no way you can just win the game like fairly without any sort of axe or thing like that, I think you might just try to rely on a cheese because you have to maximize your odds. But is that something you have to do every time versus every opponent to try to get a good matchup versus them and not play your own game? I don't think so.
What about you, Jabba? Do you see any merit to, oh fuck, I'm against Brofist, I should probably try to cheese him, or oh damn, I'm against, BKC or Lavos in GSC, maybe I should try to get a little cute. Do you see any merit to that, or do you still believe that you should just play your own game, fuck what they're doing, and there's nothing to adjusting to that guy?
That's a tough question. Maybe it depends on if you can actually appropriately analyze the skill gap and go, well, he's leagues better than me, so I'm going to need to bring, like baton pass or something that I've seen he's specifically often weak to. But the thing is that Pokemon itself, it's such a high variance game that often your best bet is still to just play your game and then hope that some of that variance falls in your favor. You land a couple crits or a freeze or a power FP and rely on that to bridge the skill gap that exists.
So here's a tough one. I'm going to throw this to all three of you. I'm going to let all three of you speak about this one because this is a topic we could go on about for hours. But they obviously both matter. But which is more important, the preparation and the analytics before the game or the analytics during the game in which you go, hey, because he has this, he might not have that. Because he has this, then that Pokemon might have X move, blah, blah, blah. Is it more important to do the analytic work prior to the game or in the game? Dizno.
Well, first of all, I think it's definitely more important to do the analytics in the game. But I suppose it does come down, it really boils down to what exact matchup you've got, I suppose, as well. Like, for example, if you've got Skarnbliss and they've got, Magdoll, immediately it's going to be before the game would have been important, and in the game is like, you've got a small chance to win, you got to make very scientific plays, etc. But I think overall ADV is a super balanced tier. In nearly all instances, you have a great chance, like not a great chance to win, but you got a good chance to win provided things go your way or provided you play better. So I think that in-game is definitely the place where you want to be kind of focusing more on tactics and putting more of your attention and motivation.
All right, so there's one vote for in the game. Zokuru, in the game or before the game?
First off, I would like to ask a question about your question because there is something I'm not sure about.
Please.
When you talk about analysis before the game, do you take into account how you built your team, even if that's not a preparation, just how you built your team, how you worked your matchup, how you practiced for the tournament or the game, etc., and all your knowledge of the metagame, or are you just thinking about, I am bringing this team against this guy?
Yeah, all the things before the game. How comfortable you are with your own team, how viable the team that you're planning to bring is, how much experience do you have with it, all the stuff that happens prior to actually getting into the game.
Okay, so I think the prior stuff are the most important because you cannot try to outplay someone or be better at the game or just play the game better and play for your odds and win the game if you have no prior skill to the game, no prior knowledge, if you didn't know exactly how your team function, extra. If you don't know the little tricks you can do with your Pokemon, all this stuff. I think it's very, very important to have a fluent fluent gameplay.
Okay, so we've got one vote for each. Jabba, what's more important, before the game or in the game?
I would go as far as to say neither are all that important. It's obviously dependent on what type of player you are, but I think you can get by perfectly fine not really preparing, as long as you know the tier really well, not preparing, not analyzing before the game, and then during the game, that's also playstyle dependent. But I know for me personally, I don't think I've ever had a match competitively in, say, SPL or World Cup or Smogon tournament where I went, well, odds are that in the back end he's got this, that, and that, and then I play based on that. I'm a player that just would play, and then once that gets revealed, then I take it into account. I'm not applying that type of analysis to the game because I always thought the game was more, the turn by turn was more important. Being ahead of your opponent with momentum was how I always tried to play the game.
So for the record, do you think that in-game deductive reasoning is overrated?
100%. I think people put way too much weight in it, and I see it when people talking. I thought this was his last, so I played for that. I don't think that's something you need to do. I'm sure if you can do it and you're good at it, and you've gotten to the point where you are hitting 75, 80% of the time, you're like I was actually spot on with that. Then yeah, that can add a little bit, but I don't think it's going to give you a huge edge.
So from your perspective, making the right play just turn to turn is more important than being able to make deductions.
100%, yes.
Do you agree with that, Dizno? Dizno? All right, you're getting skipped because I can't hear shit from you.
Sorry.
There he is.
Sorry, guys. I was
Put the
sorry.
Put the 3-inch
Sort of
monster.
choking fit.
Put the 3-inch
Choking
monster
on
away.
porridge. Stop, bro. But no. I 100% agree with Jabba. Yeah, I think I misunderstood the question at first. Like the before the game argument was if you don't know how to play the game, that's relevant in the before the game discussion. Like I was under the impression we were talking about two competent players here, and we're talking about which is more important, pre-game analysis or pre-game work or in-game work.
We can. Let's phrase it that way.
In terms of the turn by,
let's say the players are of roughly equal skill. Does that change your answer?
No, that's what I was. That was my original assumption. But I think Zokuru was saying that knowing the tier is more important than the in-game play. And I think that's true. But I didn't know that that's what we were talking about. Maybe I just misunderstood the question. But I agree with Jabba that turn-by-turn play is more important. Yeah.
Well, I phrased it very openly for a reason, because I kind of wanted you guys to go where you went with it. I wanted you guys to kind of look at it from different angles. I mean, yeah, obviously someone who's very experienced and comfortable in a tier is going to have built-in advantages versus someone who's just picking it up. But yes, in my mind, we're talking about guys who understand the basics and are comfortable with the tier. Tournament players, guys that are attempting to play competitively at the SPL level, World Cup level, guys who obviously have the basics down. How do you then win at that level is kind of where I was going with it. We'll take
okay.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Okay, so I would make a point on what I said previously. When I was talking about metagame knowledge and stuff like that, I wouldn't mean like the basics one. I would mean like, okay, can you study the metagame at one point, like ADV, the current ADV, for example, and just make a team that will be good versus almost every archetype with which you are comfortable with, and you can win versus everything. And just is that taken into account on the preparation? Because I'm not like preparing for one opponent, but I'm preparing for the metagame, and I think that is something that's very important. And if you use like something like a very old team, you might just lose the game because you don't have the tools to win it. That's what I was talking about.
Yeah, that's fair, and we're going to get into the subtopic of that in a little bit. One of the questions that I wanted to bring up was team preview, which is just a generational thing. Obviously, one through 4 didn't have it. After that, it did. Does team preview affect the way that we deduct information? There was a heated debate in my Discord channel yesterday between Triangles and BKC, and BKC thinks that just because there's team preview, it doesn't take away the things you have to figure out in game. It's just a different kind of in-game analysis. Triangles thinks that with team preview, there's actually less to figure out, and it becomes easier, and there's less skill in analytical deduction. So, which side of the fence do you guys fall on with that? Let's start with my buddy Dizno.
So I kind of agree with both. I think the points that were made there were that they're completely different, and that they're both still quite analytical, and it's important to kind of make decisions about what sets your opponent have on his team. But I think that I also agree with Triangles that not having team preview is it requires more skill or more experience, I guess. It doesn't mean that team preview doesn't require skill. I think it still requires a huge amount, but there's a huge difference between actually being able to see the full 6 and not, because then sets and a couple of things like that, items and stuff, are the only relevant kind of ingredients there in your deduction.
Okay, Zokuru, which side of the fence do you fall on? Is there less skill involved in the analytical deduction once you incorporate team preview, or is it simply different?
I think that is a flawed topic or question. I think that team preview was a necessary thing in Pokemon, as all the Pokemon strengths scale up. I mean, if you don't have team preview, you can just be simply randomly swept by anything in tiers such as Black and White or Auras. Like last Pokemon Volcarona just can ruin your day like half the time if they wouldn't have team preview. Whereas in DPP, in ADV, GSC, ABY, there is no that. It's very rare that you have last Pokemon that will just beat the last 6 Pokemon from your opponent, because there is always a way to stop it. There is no threats you have to take into account from turn 1 to negate their sweep potential. So I think it was a necessary thing, and I don't think that should be dispute or whether it's good or not, because there is no way you can just take it away from Gens 5, 6, or 7 by your hook sets. I think that would be very, very, very stupid. But I think it's a good thing that there is no team preview in the older gens, because it's manageable. So I think it's better that there is none, because it adds a skill to the game.
All right, so that's going to prompt a two-part question to Jabba. A, is team preview necessary in newer gens? And B, the previous question, how does it change the way that we use in-game deduction and in-game analysis?
One thing it obviously punished is kind of in Gen 3 and Gen 4, there was something to be said about a talent for being able to scout your opponent's team in an efficient manner, where you're not giving up much information of your own in order to glean as much information. That was a skill that obviously we lost a little bit. Like Dizno said, there's still other things you need to find out. Like, obviously, guy has an Infernape. That doesn't mean anything to you other than he has an Infernape. So you still obviously need to go through the motions of figuring out exactly what that is before you can really plan around it. So, you kind of, you lose it, but there still is a little bit that's needed. As for if it was necessary, Probably. I think I haven't really given too much thought about the necessity, but probably. And I think in Gen 4 itself, I've had this discussion before. I think it did start to rear its head a little bit, where you are seeing that last Pokemon sweep, and which goes back to what I was discussing earlier, where you play. There is a little bit to be gained by having that talent of what's his last, and you're like, oh, I think it's last Lucario, and then you do play around that. But it was still a thing that happened. For me at least, I think Team Preview, while maybe necessary, maybe not necessary, I think it was overall a net positive, because I think it opens the game up from turn one, and I think it rewards risky plays, and especially with the later gens where you're looking at a game where one missed prediction and you're going to lose an important wall or something like that. I like having that open from turn one. I never liked in the Gen 3, Gen 4, if you have a choice bander and obviously they're going to switch, you're just taking a shot in the dark if you're trying to predict, and it results in if I take a shot in the dark with Flare Blitz against your or against your Tyranitar, and then you go to something expecting close combat, it just overly rewards this kind of guesswork that I prefer the new system where now there's no more shots in the dark, and I am glad that we lost that entire way of playing.
Okay, so back to preparing for a specific opponent. I'll let Zokuru talk first because I know that he has a very strong opinion on this subject. It has been proposed that individual tours, maybe not so much team tours, you could do that too, but that's a discussion for another day, but individual tours could maybe have a team lock where basically you submit a predetermined number of teams, whether it's just one team or maybe two teams, certainly no more than 3 teams. I mean, I guess if it's a best of 3, it could be 3 teams, but regardless of the specifics, you submit a couple of teams beforehand, and you have to use only those teams throughout the tournament. I know that Zokuru has a very strong opinion on this, so I'm going to let him go first. Should that or should that not be a thing, and why?
It depends on what you think competitive Pokemon should be about. If you think it should be about metagame analysis, in-game playing, and just be the superior player over your opponent, then you should have team lock, because there is no way to have a cheap win against someone, or you have to cheap the whole tournament and you'll lose round 2 or round 3 maximum, and you will never win it. If you think Pokemon should be a game about adaptability and being able to understand the mindset of your opponent and predicting right every turn and doing a non-analytical play but just feeling playing and stuff like that. I don't know why, but I know we'll go Rondarus right now. I'll click HPIs versus his Walrein, or I don't think some dumb shit like that. Yeah, maybe you can keep the actual the team system that we have right now, and you can also make it best of 1 for the most important tournaments. That's not a problem, but if you want to reward the best player, I think team lock is very necessary.
Team lock is very necessary, says Zokuru. Dizno, do you agree?
Well, could you phrase the question in what super necessary for what? Just for what was described there, metagame analysis, better player wins. Yeah, I think it's a superior system for that. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I think that having the ability to just remove any type of, as you say, cheesing or attempts to get lucky or just lucky kind of matchups and whatever is not something you're going to be able to ensure anyway. I think randomized opponents and randomized teams in your set of however many teams is the easiest way to remove that factor and just bring it down to overall metagame knowledge and player skill. So yeah, I agree.
So like major tours, like say ADV Cup, you think should have team lock?
Well, again, it depends on whether or not you want it to be about that. But I'm definitely down to try it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, if it's done right, yeah, absolutely, I think so.
Jabba,
I think a lot of people are in favor of it.
Jabba, team lock in individual major tours.
I would love to see it tried. I think it's definitely something that can be experimented with. If you take a look at a lot of, I think probably the closest approximation to Pokemon, it's a pretty unique competitive game. So I think the closest approximation is probably competitive card games like Magic and like Hearthstone, etc. And they have deck locking for these tournaments, and it works out well for them, and I think it's something that we should consider, and I think it just, the way it is now, it puts a strain on everybody to prep these teams every single week. It can be a little bit exhausting. And then you do have the situations, where people over prepare for a specific player, and especially it gives an inherent disadvantage to more known players because people are going to know their play style. It's going to be very public, and so these lesser players are able to over prepare specifically for this person. So trying out team lock, I think is a direction that Smogon should go. I would give it. I don't want it in, one of these tournaments that no one really cares about. I would love to see it in, something like Classic or Grand Slam or something like that.
All right, so here's my argument against team lock, and I guess I'm in the minority on this. I'm going to fight all three of you, so we'll let you guys...
Do it right now, man.
I'm gonna.
Let's throw down fisticuffs.
I'm gonna, and you guys can rebuff my argument here. I think that if you have team lock in major tours, you actually significantly narrow down the metagame and you see a lot more mirror matches. I think if you were to do it in ADV, Jinx goes extinct, Weezing goes extinct, Charizard goes extinct. I think a lot of these Pokemon just disappear. I think that in ADV, team lock would consist of Big 5+1, Magdalls, and standard offenses, and I think 90% of the players would lock into one of those archetypes, and I think surprise Pokemon would not be seen. I think, the Breelooms, the Jinxes, I think all that stuff would just disappear, and I think that's bad for the game. Now, you can argue the other way that that's good for the game. No more randomly getting BS'd out by Jinx. No more Perish Trap Gengar BSing me out. Some people think that's a good thing, and I get it, but I don't agree. I think that the metagame gets stale that way, and you're going to play a ton of mirror matches and a ton of similar teams, and I think it gets stale, and I think it becomes narrow. Who wants?
Can I jump in and field this one?
Please.
Okay,
I think that you can easily solve that problem just by doing lock 5, bring 3, and now you can have one or two teams on the side that have those types of memes. You can have your 3 base solid teams, and then you can have something on the side that's going to bring something unexpected. And every single week you can kind of make that determination. Should I bring my just locked solid 3 teams, or should I bring something a little more interesting this week?
Yeah, I agree with it.
If you're locking 5, doesn't that almost defeat the point of team lock? Like at that point, can't you just...
No, not at all. Because you're still not preparing for the individual that you're playing.
Yes, you are bringing 5 teams that are good versus the metagame in general, and you are picking 3 for your opponent. But you are not building a whole team from A to Z just to defeat one opponent and then delete it from your build-up because it's bad and it would just aim at one guy.
Okay, so is that a good thing or a bad thing, Zokuru?
I think if you have like 5 teams and you have to pick 3, or even 6 teams, that's not a problem. The idea here is that you have to build it before you know about who you will play. This way you can't just try to cheese him as an individual player, but you have to try to cheese a certain play styles, and then the metagame can adapt around it, extra. And like for example, offensive trumpet can have been considered as a cheese or something like that by some people, but it become a trend, and it's actually a very potent Pokemon in the metagame right now. And I don't think stuff like that should be taken down. But I think what is very stupid is when you open your team to something like Zapdos, you will be just destroyed by Zapdos, just in virtue of, okay, my opponent will never use Zapdos. This kind of thing, I think, are very, very dumb.
So your biggest issue specifically is me saying I'm against whatever. I'm against Cyber Odin next week. He never brings Zapdos counters, so because I'm against him, I'm bringing, he never uses Zapdos, rather, so I'm going to bring this team that would utterly get destroyed by Zapdos, this team that is probably not viable, but because I know he's not going to bring it, I'm going to bring this team. That's kind of your issue with it?
Yeah, because this way, if you do that, if you use a team that will be destroyed by Zapdos versus someone, it makes that the two players don't play on an equal field metagame-wise. And I think that just flow the game and the competitive aspect of it.
Now, what would you say to just the obvious counter-argument, someone like me who goes, it's not my fucking problem Cyber Odin doesn't bring Zapdos. If you're going to refuse to bring a poke, if you're going to only have a couple things that you're comfortable with, that's your problem. Don't punish me because you're not versatile or because you only want to bring certain kinds of teams. Why should I pay the price for that? I should be able to bring whatever I want.
Yeah, you still can play whatever you want in a team block. If you want to be 6-0'd by Zapdos in a team block tournament, that's your problem. There is no problem with that. Do ahead and you'll just lose round one. I'm not taking away your ability to use whatever team you want. I'm just taking away your ability to chase people with that. If you want to play it because you like the team or whatever, it's fine. You can do ahead and do that. There is no problem.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think Zokuru just wants a tournament scene where players are building to win the tournament rather than building to win against individual opponents every single week.
Yeah, I mean.
So what would you say to, like, say, not knowing your opponent's name, for example? Would that be another relevant?
That's another cool way.
Yeah.
But how do you even do that?
Yeah, how is it? I mean, how do you schedule with that guy if you don't know who it is? You have an intermediary be like, hey man, player A, player B are gonna show up at 4 o'clock.
Is that what you're kind of advocating for, Zucker? That's what I'm just asking, really, to be honest. Like that kind of not that exact system, but just what that would bring in terms of how you would prepare.
I don't think he wants you to not know your opponent. I think he wants you to not be able to build your team from scratch after knowing who your opponent's going to be.
Yes, but it's the same thing. If you don't know what your opponent will be, you will not prepare. You'll just bring a team.
You mean you could bring a Zapdos team? You could actually choose a Zapdos team specifically if he's weak to Zapdos, but you shouldn't be allowed to build one.
Basically, he wants to go. My opponent doesn't use Dugtrio and Blissey, so I'm going to use all Combine spammers, fuck you, and I'm doing this specifically to beat you. I know this team sucks. I know if my opponent has a Dugtrio or a Blissey, I lose on the spot.
Whoa. Did you just say Combine spam sucks?
That's not what I said.
You get out of here.
We're using an example though. Like if you
I know, I'm just giving you shit.
If you know that your opponent
how to trigger Jabba 101, like
well, I'd let him know what I do to his fiance. But anyway.
Wow. In the Pokemon talk, you're bringing that shit here. Really?
Guys, settle these domestic disputes somewhere else.
She looks like a Snorlax. I thought it was relevant.
Let's use that as an example. Okay, let's say I'm paired with Jabba in a tournament, and I am Jabba will use CM spam. I am 100% sure of that. Okay, what will I do? Okay, there is my team: Blissey, Snorlax, Dugtrio, Spadef, Tyranitar, Spadef, Swampert, and Aerodactyl. What will you do about that? That's just stupid. You can tease people like that and win games just because, okay, I'll bet my game on you will bring X shit and okay, let's go.
But can I ask the question again?
I can count that way.
I didn't really get the answer. I was kind of interested in before because I think we changed topic a bit. But like, are you saying that say if one of your teams has a Zapdos that you've put in this team lock, say there's 5 teams in the team lock, you should be allowed to use the team you choose, not a random team against a specific opponent, but you shouldn't be allowed to build a new one.
Yes, you should. You have to bring 5 team or 7 or how many you want, depending on the rule set, and then you have to pick whatever team you want on those X team selection, and you can reuse it how many times as you want versus the same opponent. There is no restriction on that. Just you cannot add team to your pool during the tournament.
All right, let me ask it this way. This, I think, is actually the most important question. Basically, how necessary is this? How prevalent of an issue is this? Because from my observation, and maybe I just don't know what I don't know, but it feels to me like most of the top players in most of these tiers, the ABRs, the Charm Flashes, the Laniers, it feels to me like they're not bringing things to beat their opponent. It feels like they're just bringing solid standard teams and playing well, and that they're not trying to cheese the other guy out. So like I would have to ask, how prevalent do we think this issue actually is? How many guys do we think are actually doing this to the extreme that Zokuru is describing, where they're specifically looking at an opponent and saying, I am going to build a team to beat this guy? I just don't think it happens all that often. Do we have a different perception of that? Do we think that that's a prevalent thing in the tournament scene?
I mean, I've lost to counter styling, counter teaming more times than I can count throughout my tournament career. I think it is a common thing. I don't think you're going to get it from the best of the best, but I think if you're going into SPL, your average, say 4-4 player, maybe slightly even worse than that. You're 2-6, you're 3-5 player, or 3-6. It's 9 games. I think that's something they look to do a lot, and so I have run into it a lot. I've had people do exactly what Zokuru said. The Blissey, Snorlax, Aerodactyl teams, because they know I'm going to bring CM spam. So I think it is a pretty prevalent thing.
But do you see a difference between counter style and counter team? Because I definitely do. I definitely see.
Well, counter teaming is dead because of how often teams are switched up these days. Because of SPL. SPL 1, everyone brought the same team every single week. SPL, what are we on now? 10, 11, whatever. People are bringing a different team every week. So you're kind of locked into counter styling. Counter teaming used to be because you thought your team was secret and nobody knew it. So people would exactly bring something to beat that specific team, which used to be a very common thing and something I did run into in World Cup and early SPL, but it's essentially dead these days. But counter styling is definitely alive and well.
But is that a bad thing? Like if a Pokemon player is a flawed player and they only use certain types of teams, or they refuse to use certain Pokemon that are in the metagame, why is it not okay to take advantage of that? Why, if my opponent, like in ADV, if my opponent just refuses to use Dugtrio for some reason, why shouldn't I take advantage of that? Isn't that fair game?
Okay, can I answer this?
Please.
I think I have a good answer for this. I think you played a card game, CALLOUS. I think you did that.
Sure.
Played a competitive card game, yeah.
Yeah, I'm playing devil's advocate here. Go ahead.
I don't know about Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! I think you can only use one deck, but I know in some games like Hearthstone, you are allowed to use up to 3 or 4 decks in some tournaments.
Yes.
and there is that format that is called, I think it's called King of the Hill or something like that. And each time one of your deck is defeated, your opponent have to keep the same deck, and you're allowed to bring another deck of your choice in your deck selection. You locked before the tournament.
Right.
And this way you can try to counter style some deck. Well, it's more about adding tech card into your deck to beat certain playstyle or deck you might face. And this way, your deck is still okay. It's good versus the whole meta game. It's a top meta deck if you're a serious player. But you have that extra advantage versus what you want to beat. And I think it would be kind of the same for Pokemon. You can have team in your team selection that are okay versus the metagame in general, like you won't lose versus Zapdos, but you have that extra thing to beat like a very fat team user player and or stall guys that will just load restall their team selection. You have two options in backup. That's why log 5 play 3 might be a good thing, because you have those extra team to punish two greedy players that will just bring the same playstyle like on like 3 or of their 5 team, because they are confident with that and will just like take the same team, and you can punish those by this way, and you gain an advantage over them. But it's like you did that prior to the tournament because you felt the need of it, and not just because you are randomly paired versus someone who used that.
Interesting. I'll throw it over to Dizno. I mean, where do you stand on the core issues? So, like, if I'm against an opponent and in this day of replays and usage statistics, and anybody can look at all the tournament games that their opponent has played in the last 3 years, that's the world we live in. So, I mean, if I'm against somebody and I go, wow, this guy literally never uses Magneton, so obviously I'm bringing Skarm, or wow, this opponent never plays Blissey, so I'm going to go with a special offense. Am I doing something wrong in doing that? I feel like that should be fair game. Do you think that that's cheesy or something that we should not be doing? No.
I've been sympathetic. Sorry, I got delayed again. I keep choking on my porridge. I need to get a drink. I'm absolutely an advocate of it. I don't think that that it's wrong to punish a poorly made team, or a kind of a consistently used poorly made archetype. Like, say your opponent is consistently weak to whatever, insert whatever here. I don't see anything wrong with bringing, absolutely, making sure you bring that versus them. If you really see it as a weakness, you're not counter styling them to a huge degree. You're just punishing them for a basic incompetency, I think. Although I think I agree with Zokuru, though it's not they're not mutually exclusive. You can do that in team lock using Jabba's method that you mentioned earlier, the team lock +3. But yeah, just to answer the question generally, as you said, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that at all. I actually put the same thing to BKC before, and he said to me, I too enjoy countering my opponent's playstyle, kind of sarcastically, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's fine.
I mean, we can use like a non-Gen 3 example. Like for example, let's go to Gen 6. Let's go to Oros. Like, if I were against an opponent and I looked at their last dozen tournament games and I go, wow, I think at least 2/3 of those teams just instantly lose to Volcarona. Is it wrong for me to go, hey, I think I should use Volcarona against this guy? Like, to me, I think that's just part of the strategy. I think that's fair game.
Yeah, that's fair game, because Volcarona is just broken, and you will win versus 70% of the team from turn 1, so it's fine. Now, more seriously, I think if you see that your opponent is weak to a certain threat, like every time, he's just bad. He should be punished for that. The problem is when you might take. I mean, you can do a good team versus the metagame with Volcarona, and will win versus your opponent just because you have Volcarona, and that's okay. But if you build a specific team that will lose to something like, I don't know, Mega Medicham or Mega Slowbro, just to use that specific Pokemon with this specific support that will beat your opponent 99% of the time, I think you're just trying to cheese away a victory, and the tournament rule set, if it permits that, to a great extent, because you can still have that team on your team selection, but you can harm yourself for doing that, and that's a risky strategy. Being able to repeatedly use this risky strategy to a different extent to each time at each round, because you know the name of your opponent and you're able to freely build some counter team to them, because you have like more time not to learn the metagame but to just counter style your opponent, won't make you a better player. And if the better player can't win reliably, even in early rounds of a tournament, I don't think the game is that competitive. I think that was the point that was brought up with Team Lock.
Is there any validity to the thought process that a truly great player should not be able to be counter-styled or counter-team? That like they should just be versatile and be able to just bring any kind of good team at any time, and if someone wants to gamble on trying to counter-style them, hap at it. But I mean, like, shouldn't
Yeah,
there...
can I take that up?
Please.
I don't think that's that's a pretty reasonable statement to me. I mean, if there's a way that if there is a legitimate clink in your armor where somebody can beat you by preparing, in air quotes, for your team, then surely that's a weakness on your end. If they do have this sudden, if they do have this hidden kind of thought process that only they have, that that kind of looks right through your play style and finds a weakness in your team building and in your style, then isn't that kind of an issue on your end rather than on their end?
That's what I think.
I don't see how this actually. That's how I weigh in anyway. I don't know.
I agree. Yeah, I think one-trick pony stuff doesn't work in Pokemon. It works in League of Legends. You could just play the same champion all the way up and up and up. But I mean, because obviously you play against different opponents every time. The opponents aren't communicating with each other. They don't go, hey, this guy that I played in ranked 3 games ago only uses this, only uses this. But it doesn't work that way in Pokemon. I mean, you can't be a one-trick pony. Like, there's just no, in this modern era, you can't just use the same team every week in SPL. It will absolutely never work. If you continue to do that after the second or third week, obviously someone's just going to full-on counter you. And, I mean, that's on you, right? At some point, don't you... I mean, I just refuse to believe that somebody like a Brofist, an ABR, whatever, can't use offense, defense, mid-range, stall, can't just use all the teams if need be. They might like some better than others. They might have preferences, but I mean, I have a hard time thinking that these players are not able to pilot whatever viable archetype, and they're not just stuck using the same thing every game. Is that fair?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think every good player is able to play at least decently and at better very perfectly or nearly perfectly with every style of team. But I mean, they will be better with a certain style, and they will have preferences. If I really enjoy playing X team or X style of team, not necessarily the same team. There can be huge differences, but in modern generation, there are Pokemon that are designed to beat like, okay, this Pokemon will beat most bulky offense. This Pokemon will beat like most fat stuff with Toxapex, Ferrothorn, etc. And you can just slap it and with a bit of support, beat someone with a threat that has like 1% usage and you can't really account for that in the team building. And if you bring another team, you will completely defeat it. But admitting that there are still ways to chip a win, like 40% of the time, or even 30% of the time, even if your opponent is really diverse, because you can use some several of these Pokemon to different purpose on the same team, and your team is inherently flawed, but you'll still be able to win like 30 or 40% of the time, just because X Pokemon will just destroy the opponent team, because your opponent cannot account for that in team building. And well, if you have his usage state, in addition to being able to use flowed team without being punished other than on one game, you don't have to hurt yourself for all the tournament to do that. You just have to gamble on one game. I think the balance of it is really not balanced. It's very imbalanced as a strategy. I think it's risky, but it's not as much risky as it should be.
But can you just turn the argument back on itself, though? Couldn't you just say that taking the risk and the fact that the risk alone is what gave you the lead is commendable? And also, it's strange to me as well, because the only relevant point I see here is you don't know who your opponent's going to be. So if you could make the argument that if you were given a different opponent this round, then that technique wouldn't work. But then again, you wouldn't have used the technique if it was a different opponent. So it doesn't really make any sense to me. You can just turn the same argument back on itself. I don't get why you would say that because it's risky, it's a silly, cheesy tactic.
I have another.
I don't understand.
I have another problem too. How about this? How about a logistical problem with it? So let's take a multi-format tour like Smogon Classic, right? We're gonna do team lock. So here's the problem. So we're only gonna lock in one team for every generation. Okay, well in that case, I'm just gonna watch the replays and I'm gonna know everything about the guy's team before I play him next round. That's a problem. Okay, why don't we lock in 3 teams for every gen? Okay, so you're now asking players to lock in 15 teams? That seems like a problem too. Like logistically, I don't know how a tour like that does best of 5s. How do you do team lock in something like Classic?
It's really easy to fix as a problem. You just send your teams to the host before the tournament, and all the replays are private until the end of the tournament. That's it.
So you want to get rid of replays too for these tournaments until the end of the tour.
Or you can make them available for like before the grand finals or something like that if you want. But like you can just make semi-finals and finals public, and when the finals is over, you can release all the replays from round 1 if you want, something like that. Anyway, right
it just sounds like a less interesting tour to watch as well, though.
That's what I was just going to say. I can't speak for anyone else, but as a spectator, I would be much less interested if...
I mean, would the game even be as big as it is now if it was like that? And how do you go about editing that? Like, say, I'm not going to straw man and say you want that for SPL or whatever, but I mean, in SPL, isn't one of the most valuable tactics about SPL being able to build a team for the game and stuff like that? I mean, would you have where do you want to impose team lock, I suppose is what I'm asking there.
Let's go over to let's go over to Jabba. He hasn't spoken in a little while. Jabba,
it's been many a moon since I've gotten a word in here.
How do we if we're doing it in like a tournament like Classic, like a multi-format, is there any logistically sound way to team lock in a tour like that?
No, I don't. I don't think there is, and I guess that is probably the core problem. And I think you're actually going to probably look at same issues in every other tournament. Say you're bringing 6, locking 3 in just a normal tournament. You're going to have people watching your replays, and then it almost becomes like a roulette. What do I think they're going to bring, and what do I think gives me a better matchup, and that just adds a whole nother level of, I don't want to call it RNG, but I don't think it would be. I think it would be a bit annoying for the players to run into that roulette. We already have some of it right now, but I think that would exacerbate the problem a little bit. And something like Classic, I do think the only way would be to block replays, and that brings it back around. Or actually, considering what I just said, I think you have to do it for every single tournament. But it's exactly what you said. I think the game used to be very spectator unfriendly. No one would share the logs. Matches would disallow spectators, and everyone was keeping these things extremely close to the vest. And I think it made for an extremely unfortunate spectator game, especially Smog on tour. It was a tour day. Some days I would like to just sit there and I would watch a couple games from every round. And I'm going down the list and I'm trying to watch these games, and every single one of them is spectators disallowed. And I think that was probably the worst it's ever been, being a spectator. And I think we've gotten to the point where the game has adapted finally to kind of reward the spectator. And that's why you see, Showdown chat going crazy over games. You got hundreds of people watching these really big games, if not, even more than that. And I think to remove that from the game, I don't think we can do that. I think that would be a huge step backwards. And considering that, I don't think there's any way to really rectify trying to do these team locks in a way that works with trying to also keep Pokemon a good spectator sport.
I would have a huge problem getting rid of replay, not only for the spectator things, but also, a Jabba didn't even mention, how about the cheating? How about, so Undisputed locked in his team for SPL, and we don't have any replays of it. I'm playing against him next week, so BKC...
Yeah, that used to be a huge problem.
Hey, BKC, buddy, why don't you ship me $20 via PayPal, and I'm gonna show you the private replay. I'm gonna give you the notes that I took on his team. Here's everything that he had that you're gonna be against next week.
Mop used to go around and he would trade logs with people.
That just
he would be like, "Oh, here's what your opponent's bringing. What's my opponent bringing?"
Yeah, that opens up all sorts of shady shit. I have a real problem with hiding the replay, but I know Zokuru's itching to get in here. Go ahead. What did you want to say?
Well, I was doing a bit of the devil advocate, because me as a player, even on ladder tournament. And replays are a big thing on ladder tournament, because you can be instantly scooped by your next opponent and lose the game on the spot because your whole team. But even on ladder tournament, I almost never hide a replay. When I go into a game, I just assume my opponent knows my team from A to Z, unless I never played it or I just changed a tech move on it, so because this way no one can know it. But if I already played the team, I just assume my opponent might know it. And I think, in no team preview generation, that's a big issue because there is scouting, extra. But what I wanted to say is that I'm not a pro replay ban person. I just think it was a logistical way to do stuff, because some people might want to have their replay hidden. Personally, I don't mind if my replays are public, even in a team selection tournament, because I think my teams will be able to be, just by playing wisely, I don't rely on surprise move to beat people, so I don't think I'd have any problem with public replays. But as I know some people might have, I just said you can make the replays hidden and only visible by the tournament host.
So
But yeah.
this is an assumption. I can't speak for the whole community, but my assumption would be, if this ever like came to a vote, do you want to do this? Hide the replays to the end of the tour, then we'll show you. I think that it would be overwhelmingly shot down. I think most people would be opposed. So I don't know that I'm right, but let's just roll with it for argument's sake. If the community were unwilling to hide the replays until the end of the tournament, do you see any way, Zokuru, to still logistically do this? In like a tournament like Classic, if you want to have team lock and if hiding the replays is not an option, do you have another way to do it?
Well, if people want to scout what your team is, you can do it too. And remember, you can't change your team between the rounds. So even if it's kinda in some cards game, you can play with the open list of your opponent's deck. I know that thing. Maybe it's a bad thing for no team preview generation, but it might just start to be the case. Anyway, the sets are known and the team are kinda known right now too, so we kinda almost play open list right now with the Scouter extra. So maybe we should just go for it. I don't know. I'm not a very big advocate of that, but it might be an answer to have a more competitive game in the meta analysis kind of thing and in-game playing, because you cannot be screwed up by a stupid matchup. But just get rid of the no team preview thing in order gen is a big sacrifice to do that, I admit.
All right, so now that we are just over the hour mark, I want to let everybody have a chance. This is a loaded topic. I feel like we could go for another hour. I'm not going to keep you guys here, but we probably could. I'm going to give each of you guys an opportunity to say your closing piece on this, and then we'll wrap it up. Basically, overall, as far as team preview, as far as team lock, as far as what should be done to improve the structure of tournaments, if anything, I'm going to give each of you a chance to respond as to what you would like to see as the ideal going forward. Who wants to go first on that?
I'll go.
Please.
So it's been another little while. I think at the end of the day, we're never going to know what's better or what's worse if we don't add a little experimentation. I think Smogon specifically, it often falls trap to just doing things the way they've always done them, and things get a bit stale. And I know in recent years there's been a little bit of upturn finally. There's been a little bit of change. You know, we're adding best of threes to places finally that should have had best of threes, 10 years ago, especially Smogon Tour. I remember playing in Smogon Tour 5 when it was best of 1, and that's just a mess. So, we're moving forward in a lot of ways. So I would like to see a little bit of experimentation on Smogon's part. They have so many official tournaments. I think they could use a couple, and they could just test out these kind of ideas and see what works and what doesn't. But we're in a position where they don't have any competitors, especially in the tournament scene. So there's been no need to. But I think it would be beneficial for them and the community if they took the opportunity more often to test these ideas out and see what happens. When we're on the other side, we might find out, hey, this doesn't work for Pokemon. We tried it and it just did not work at all. Then we can at least know. We can know this doesn't work. So at the end of the day, that's my main concern. I would just like to see some more experimentation with things like these.
So Jabba's in the middle, but he wants people to be more open-minded. He wants people to try stuff. That seems like a pretty reasonable and fair take. How about you, Dizno? What do you want to see happen?
So, yeah, I completely agree. I'd like to see some prototyping of, different, say, team lock going for a certain tour. and then not just completely replacing any given format we have already. Just trying it out somewhere, seeing what it's like. Seeing as it does have a decent amount of traction behind it, I'd like to see that for sure. I don't want to see anything to do with replay removal, especially at a high level tournament that we already might have that has a lot of traction, a large audience behind it. Who would want to go to the NFL? How would the NFL be as big as it is if there was no fans to watch the game, so no replays? If every team was just supposed to play the other team and nobody was allowed to watch, or whatever, it's a totally different game. It's a different ball game, and I don't think any of us would play it if that's the way it was. I think that Team Lock certainly has some merits. I know UD is a big fan, BKC is a big fan, Zokuru is definitely a propagator as well. I'd like to see it at least just a test tour somewhere, as long as somebody can make a legitimate system where it actually is implemented correctly on Showdown, and then have see how it does, see how it fares. Right now, though, in given tours, I don't think that non-team lock is somehow cheesy, as people are saying. I don't see what the advantage is to completely removing people's ability to punish other people for monotonous team building archetypes.
And Zokuru, finally, if you were the sole decision maker over on Smogon, what would you like to see happen? How would you do this?
I don't know exactly how I'll do this, but I think I would be higher on the competitive aspect of the game than I'd be on the spectatorized thing. I think people being able to watch the game is really important, but I think competitiveness should be the main thing we should take care in first. Yeah, I think that's the philosophy I'll try to apply.
Fair enough. That was a loaded talk, guys. We covered quite a bit of ground. Like I said, I feel like on this topic we could go for another hour. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Should we try Team Lock? Is Team Preview a good thing or a bad thing? Is there a logistically sound way to do Team Lock in certain tours? Please do weigh in. Let me know what you think. I appreciate you guys watching, and I will see you in the next Pokemon Talk.